Today, September 29, we celebrate World Interaction Design Day. And we have a special guest with us on this special occasion. Coming to our presenter, he is a certified CUA by Human Factors International. He is a strong user advocate in a world dominated by codes and ROIs. Over the years of experience in digital media and his fierce passion for simplicity and commitment to making technology work for people have helped business to save cost and increase revenue by improving market acceptance. With 19 plus years of experience as a UX consultant, UX mentor, UX course creator, and speaker, I would like to introduce Mr. Shiv Prasad Palyer, founder of ScreenFlows.com, to share some valuable insights on from bad design to badass product. A recorded version of this webinar will be available in our YouTube channel. For the ease of better experience, we have muted the audience mic during the presentation time. Please raise your queries in the comment section. Although we have an exclusive Q&A section after the webinar where the audience can interact and discuss. Okay, for those of you just joining us, welcome. So without taking more time, I'm handing over the mic to Shiv Prasad.
Thank you, Grima, for the great introduction, and thank you, everyone, those who are from IDF Kerala and those who are not from IDF Kerala, everybody who took the time out to join this Tuesday, 3 p.m. You could have been anywhere in the world and you could have been doing anything else, but you decided to come here, and it's such an honor to be here and speaking to you all. And thank you for having me here. And thank you, each one of you, to take your time out and decided to come and join this session. And thank you, Jinsen and IDF Kerala, for this great opportunity to speak to you all. So I think you know a little bit about me. So I'm not taking any more time to speak about myself, and I'm not good at bragging myself. So this is how I have planned for the next 1 hour. So yes, I'll be speaking about the bad designs, what makes a bad design and what we can learn from bad design, and how we can use that learning from bad design to create better products and services. And if you stick around till the end, I have a surprise for you, but there is a small catch to it. And that is, when I start speaking, I tend to forget what the time and everything. So I want you to remind me about this little surprise that I have in store for you if you stick around till the end. And if you remind me about the surprise, I'll definitely give it, I'll give you the ways to get it. So after that, yesterday, I'm not sure if you have got a message from Jinsen saying that to find any bad designs that you have in mind. Maybe if you have found any, then maybe we can deconstruct the bad designs that we have found, and maybe we can try to discuss and find out why it is bad. Then towards the end, we can have a question and answer session, as Grima said. So without much ado, let's start. So what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you come across a bad design? For me, these are the three things that come to my mind. One, bad design really shouts while good design is invisible. Bad design affects users' productivity and efficiency, and bad design is expensive. Now let's see each one of them separately. Bad design actually stops, slows down, and frustrates the users. And on the other hand, a good design facilitates users' desirable actions. So if you are working on a bad design, actually, it will stop you from performing the task, or it will slow you down from performing the task. So the bad design becomes very obvious, and it just juts out from the interface. And you will notice the bad design. But when it comes to good design, you will flow through the design, you will flow through the product, you will flow through the task so easy that you will absolutely ignore, or you will not even notice that there exists a design to that product. So Good design is always invisible, while bad design always shouts out to your face. Now, the second aspect to bad design is bad design affects users' productivity and efficiency. Now, what do I mean by that? Bad design actually increases the number of steps it requires for users to perform a task. And when the number of steps increases, actually it increases the number of the time it takes for them to perform a task. And it, on the other hand, it will also increase the number of errors that the user might commit when they are performing a task. So productivity and efficiency gets negatively affected by the bad design. Now, the third important aspect of bad design is it is very expensive. So being expensive has two parts to it. One is the cost part and one is the revenue part. Now, the cost part is obviously bad design leads to an expensive redesign effort or initiative. So the more deeper or the deeper you are or the more advanced you are in the project or design process, the more expensive your redesign efforts is going to be. So it is better to take care in the beginning stages itself through usability testing and by proper user research to avoid bad design elements or bad user experience elements in the process, in the project. So definitely bad design has cost implications. Now, the other thing that we need to take care about bad design is it has its implications on what do you call the revenue side. The revenue side can be affected through a bad design negatively affects the first time users. Maybe the first time users are in the trial version or using the trial version of the product. And now when the bad design frustrates the first time users, what they actually do is they will decide not to renew or to buy the full license. And they will end the product experience itself or the engagement with the product itself during the trial phase itself. And for an experienced user or with somebody with the full license, they may decide that they get frustrated so much that they will decide not to renew the product. So on the one side, the cost gets affected to redesign process. On the other hand, you will start to, or the bad design results in the business losing new customers or the existing customers. So in both ways, bad design is expensive for the business. Now let's see what makes a bad design. Bad design creates a bad first impression. Now what do I mean by that? Imagine that you are walking into a cafe and you are going there to meet a friend of yours. Now you walk into the cafe and you find your friend sitting at the far corner table, and you walk up to him or her hoping that it's your friend, but suddenly you realize that it's not your friend. Now what will be your reaction? You will just walk away from that person, right? So looking for your friend elsewhere in the cafe. This is the same kind of reaction that you can expect from when a customer approaches a product also. Now, when the customer approaches a product, the first point of contact between the user and the product is very crucial, because this is the time when he judges the product and builds the confidence and the trust around that product. So every product, when you are designing, it needs to capture this moment, the first point of contact, and optimize the experience there. Now let's see an example here. It's very interesting actually. So this is the website of camphub.in. This is a site that I was working with some time ago. And what they actually specialize in camping holidays. Now, if somebody, a user comes and visits this website with a camping holiday in mind, what would be their first reaction? He would be more like a friend sitting at the far corner table hoping that it's his friend, and he comes there and realizes that it's not his friend and he walks away. It's the same kind of experience that this site is going to give him, because he has a camping idea in mind and he comes and visits this site, and he feels that this is related to travel, but where is the camping idea behind all this? I mean, are they good at it? How do they do they really specialize in camping holidays? Because there is nothing to show that. So it does not communicate that it is related to camping holidays, or do they specialize in camping holidays. It doesn't show. So having a website like this that does not communicate your USP or what you are really capable of will only give a bad experience, and you will only lose customers by having such a website. So this happens primarily because the team behind the website did not do the proper user research. Why people are coming to the website, and they might not even have created a proper set of personas. Maybe a well-crafted persona might have saved the whole issue for them, but they did not do it. So it is one of the issues that I repeatedly see across many websites, because they don't communicate what they are capable of and how they solve the problems. Now, there are several ways to solve this or to improve the first impression that the product can give to the user. One would be through creating a professional, minimal, modern, contemporary design that really appeals to the customer. And the next one would be to have a clear USP. By USP, what I mean is unique selling proposition of the business and the website. So the website should clearly communicate what and how the product will solve users' problem. So that is the USP. That is USP of that product or business. Now the next one would be to have a clear call to action. It can be a button, or it can be a button, it can be a link, whatever. But there should be a clear call to action that will allow the user to take the next logical action. Now, other than that, you need to have many trust markers for the website. Trust markers, what I mean by is that you need to have an about us, you need to have a pricing policy, data policy, you need to have achievements that the business has, for example, testimonials, awards, social proof, everything can be listed there. And I listed out a few things, but one overarching consideration for all this is, this should be visible for the users. And how will you make it visible for the users? And for that, you need to make sure that all this information are in the field of view of the users. And where is the field of view of the users? That is in the first scroll, that is above the fold. Above the fold. Above the fold, the term comes from print and it is carried over to the digital media. So above the fold, that is the first scroll. When the page loads, that is where the first screen that appears is the above fold area of the website. So you need to place it cleverly in that area, making good use of the space available. So always keep the relevant information in the field of view of the user, so that they can easily comprehend and take logical decisions on it. Now, bad design is most probably crowded. This is one of the websites that I have seen. This is one of the most crowded websites I have seen in my entire career. Actually, this belongs to ICICI Bank. And when a website or when a UI is so crowded like this, it actually fails to direct users' attention to the most relevant information, labels, tasks, and buttons, and whatever screen elements that they have. It actually slows down users from making the relevant decision, logical steps. It will actually decrease the quality of the decision-making process of the users. And it will increase the number of errors that the user will commit. So always, this is a big issue with most of the websites that are out there in the web. Now, how can you prevent the UI from getting crowded? You can prevent the UI from getting crowded by avoiding or taking away all the non-contextual, non-task relevant screen elements and information. That is, anything that is not related to either the context or for the user in doing a particular task at a given point of time, you need to remove it. So if you are successful in doing that, then your UI will never get crowded. Bad design does not reward the user. What I mean by reward is, the reward should be the ability of the user to use the product itself. I'm not referring to any reward like brownie points or carrot points or any free goodies that the website should offer to the users. I'm not asking the website or the people behind it to bribe the users to continue using the product. So the using of the product itself should act as a reward for the user. Now let's see how it acts as a reward. Now this is the Android app of the same CampHub.io. So on the one hand, it does not communicate what the product, how the product can solve users' problem, because you will need to remember that the people are coming there with a camping idea in mind. Now, it does not communicate how CampHub solves the user's problem. On the other hand, they also ask from the users their most relevant information, such as email ID, phone number, and their names and their credentials, everything they need to register and put in there. Now, do you think that a product, when the users are not very much aware how this product is going to solve their problem, will they be ready to share their most credentials, most relevant information with this application or website? That's a rare chance that you can expect from something from a user like that. So the solution here would be to allow the users to experience and feel the product, at least to some number of days or some number of tasks. At least let them feel the product first, and then you ask for their most relevant information. They need to have the trust and confidence in their product. Only then they will be willing to share that information. Now, bad design looks and behaves very much inconsistently. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, this is, again, you might be thinking that I hate ICICI Bank. Yes, I do hate, because I know I have personally interacted with them, and I use them. I use ICICI Bank website on a daily basis, and I have done a heuristic evaluation of that also. So I know I hate it, but I'm still a customer of it. But still, I find a lot of inconsistencies, and one of them is when you click on the payment link, it's surprisingly, on the one page it opens as a mega menu, on the other it opens as a new page. Now, because of this inconsistency, what happens is that the user's cognitive load increases tremendously, and it will create a bad impression, bad user experience for the users. And it has another side to it, and that is when the user looks at payment link, he will have to judge how it is going to behave. On the one page, it opened as a new link. On the other page, it opened as a mega menu. Now he will have to recall how it used to behave. He can never recognize it. And that brings me to the sixth Jakob Nielsen's heuristics of user interface design, that is recognition rather than recall. So in short, when the link behaves differently on each screen, on the one page it behaves as a mega menu, on the other it opens up a new window. So there is total inconsistency, and the user is forced to recall instead of recognizing it. So recall actually increases the time it takes for the user to take a task or complete a task or to recognize a screen element, how it behaves. So it actually violates Jakob Nielsen's heuristic called recognition rather than recall. This will slow down the decision making, and it will increase the number of errors that they commit when they perform a task. Now let's see how we can address the inconsistency issue. Now, consistency has two important sides to it. One, you can maintain the consistency within the product, and you can maintain the consistency across similar products. So once you address both these issues, only you will be able to maintain a consistency to the screen elements and the UI. Now, how can you address consistency within the product? There are two ways to doing it. One is by creating the style guide. Style guide, I mean, you need to define the look of the UI elements, how the header looks, how the button looks, how the fonts, layout, margin, you need to define everything. So anything that is related to the look and maybe to some extent feel of the product, feel of the screen elements, you need to define under style guide. And you also need to define the interaction design model. Now, what do I mean by interaction design model? Interaction design model refers to how you define the behavior of the screen elements. Now, when the user clicks, how it behaves. When the user pulls down, how it behaves. When the user drags something and connects it to some other screen elements, how it will behave. So you need to define all this. So once you have defined both the interaction model and the style guide, you can be pretty certain that you can make your product consistent within your screens, that is within the product. Now the second aspect of this thing is you need to make it consistent across similar products. Now, how can you make that happen? Now, at this point, it would be good to remember the Jacob-Nielsen's law. It's called as Jacob's law, which states that users spend most of their time on other websites than yours. So they expect your product to behave exactly the same way as any other website they are comfortable with or they are familiar with. This is called Jacob's law. So Jacob's law actually allows you or pre-postulates that you need to make products similar to, your product should be similar to other products, at least in terms of interaction, in terms of look and feel. But it doesn't, it always gives importance to uniqueness, your own touch, your own brand, everything should be there. But what he's trying to communicate is that essentially your product should behave more or less the same way, so that it becomes easy for the users to actually learn. The learning curve is not as difficult as you learn a rocket science. So learning curve should not be that much. So you need to make things as easy for the user to learn and to finish. So a way to achieve this would be to doing a competitive analysis. Through competitive analysis, you understand what your competitors are doing, how they are achieving a similar task, how they are making money, how they are allowing users to interact with their product. So if you find them to be very efficient and satisfying for the customers, then you need to bring it over to your product. You need to take it as an inspiration only, never copy it, and give it your own twist. So by doing three things, one is style guide, the interaction design model, and competitive analysis, you can more or less maintain the consistency in terms of UI elements, the look and the feel, and the behavior also across similar products and within the product. Now, bad design creates mental and conceptual model mismatch. This title might sound very high sounding for you, but let me try to simplify it as easy as possible. Now, by mental model, it is what the user expects from the product. It's all about the expectation of the users. Now, the conceptual model or the design model is all about how the product actually behaves. So there is a slight difference. One is how the user expects the product to behave, and the mental or the design model is all about how the product really behaves. So the conceptual model or the design model actually gets conceived in the mind of the designer. So if there is a mismatch between what the user expects and how it actually behaves, then there is very good chance of creating a bad user experience. Let's see an example now. Now, in this website that I had a chance to work on some time ago, this was a prototype. This was one of the earlier versions that they had. So in this website, when the user logs in, what used to happen was the same page gets loaded with a profile icon at the top. Now, how will you judge a login process? I mean, when you actually log in to a system, either you are taken to a profile page, or you are taken to a dashboard, or if you have been working on a task, or if you have started a task and then along the way you were asked by the system to log in, then you have to, after login also, you should be able to continue the same task. So these are the three eventualities when you ideally should happen when you log in. But here, contrary to all that, the page gets loaded with a profile icon at the top. Now, this actually creates a lot of mismatch between the conceptual model and the mental model. Now, this has created a lot of confusion for many users because they were not going anywhere. I mean, they were expecting that the system will take them to a new page, but they are still there. And they would search around and what just happened? And there is no proper system feedback also. So they got really confused as to that it is not taking them anywhere. So there is an obvious mismatch between mental and conceptual model. Now, how can you make the mental model and the conceptual model match? Now, one way of doing it would be to researching the users, understand their pain points, understand their aspirations, how they are performing currently, how they are trying to complete the task currently, and how ideally you can simplify it and help them. So researching users is one way of doing it. And the other one is to build the designs that users are familiar with. Maybe you can bring it over from other successful products, and maybe you can do a proper competitive analysis and then bring along features from other products. So these two things should actually help you to match mental model and conceptual model. Bad design has redundant elements and labels. Now, what I think you will be clear when you see a example. So in this example, this is from a site called contentstudio.in. They are into social media management, and you can schedule your posts and it automatically gets posted in multiple social media accounts and all that. So in this website, there is a screen where the dashboard there are multiple labels like dashboard, email, browser, etc. They repeat on every row. This is you will be able to find multiple hundreds of examples like this, because there will be a lot of labels in every page, and you need to always remember that you need to, wherever possible, you need to minimize the labels, minimize the screen elements. So this is one of the examples that I have found. So in this, you can actually use the dashboard, email, browser, etc. not on every row, but you can take it as a title, the column title, so that users can easily make out that the relevant check mark will come under each. So if you don't have to repeat each label again and again. It is redundant, it is totally unwanted, and it only fills space and it only confuses users. Now, by eliminating all the non-contextual and non-task relevant screen elements, redundant elements and labels can be completely avoided. Bad design does not offer contextual help. Now, we all know that users will be of different stages in terms of their experiences and in terms of their how good are they with technology, how good are they with the product, how familiar are they with the product. So always there should be some element of contextual help so that they don't feel confused at any stage. Let's see an example here. This is again another page from contentstudio.in. The system clearly indicates that the user has reached a plan limit in terms of creating the workspace, because this social media platform actually works in such a way that every user needs to create multiple workspaces. So for a trial user, what happens is they have restricted the number of workspaces that can be created as one. And for upgraded full-time, licensed users, you can create n number of workspaces. So for a trial user, what happens is that when they actually try to create, when they log in itself, they are forced to create one workspace. And now as they gather pace and feel comfortable with the product, they will obviously want to create another workspace. Now, suddenly, when they try to create another workspace, the system will indicate that your plan has reached its limits. Now, if you want to create one more workspace, you need to pay us. So this is an ideal scenario where the system or the business can make money, right? Now, the system only communicates that you need to upgrade. There is no link to upgrade. Now, that is the fun part. Now, when there is no link to upgrade, what will be the reaction of the users and what business misses here. I think when there is no link to upgrade, what happens is the design actually fails to make use of the urgency and the opportunity to make some money for the business. So this has huge revenue implications. Imagine that you have 10,000 trial customers, and almost out of that 10,000 customers, 10,000 trial customers, let's say 50% of them come across this alert, and most of them would be so urgent and so persuaded to create one more workspace to continue with their work. Imagine the amount of money that they might be losing. So even contextual help have a lot more implications towards revenue. It is not only about helping users to perform a task. It has very much revenue implications as well. If the user does not offer contextual help, you need to, obviously that is a clear indication that the design is bad. And you need to, whenever the user, you can do usability testing, you need to understand where the user is slowing down, where the user stops, and where the user is gathering pace, and where the user needs to learn extra to complete a task. So only by doing that, when you understand the user's actual behavior, their pain points, you will be able to identify spots where they are slowing down, stops, and you need to offer them contextual help there in the shape of alerts, in the shape of additional information, in the form of manuals, in the form of actually talking to a customer support guy, everything. So contextual help is absolutely essential. Now, another important aspect of bad design is it leads to task interruptions. Now, what do I mean by that? Actually, when there is a task interruption, it actually frustrates the users. It can lead to a lot of frustration for the users. Let's see an example here. In many of the softwares, actually what happens is that you need to do certain actions to continue using it. There are WordPress plugins that I know which forces you to save every now and then. And there are many softwares, project management softwares, maybe legacy systems that will force you to actually do certain actions so that you can continue using it. All this actually works as interruptions. Because when you are doing a task, what happens is that you get into a flow state. You just cruise through the task. When the design is good, you will fly through it. When the design is bad, you will still continue along the way to complete the task. But you will definitely get into a flow. Now, once in a while, when you get messages from the system saying that you need to complete this, otherwise you won't be able to continue. You are going to lose the data if you don't do this. Now, that is an ideal scenario of task interruption. Now, when that happens, it creates a bad user experience. Obviously, it creates a bad user experience. And you might, when the flow state is broken, you might even stop and go. So you might force the user to do different things in different ways, and it might lead to errors, etc. And the user might even lose the data, which can be very costly for the business as well as for the user. So many of these things in this software that I have shown, the system forces the user to save again and again. So all this saving process can be automated. Now, user just can continue with the task, but the system automatically saves the last action. So, and there should be a version control as well, so that user can go back to any level of saving or previous version of the task also. So always make sure that there is a system that works in the backend that will help the user to regain the control. Now, one way of addressing the task interruption is by allocating function allocation. What do I mean by function allocation? Function allocation refers to how we allocate the tasks between the system and the users. So one important caveat that we need to remember here is when you are allocating tasks to the users and the systems, you need to make sure that the system should assign the users the role of an approver or a supervisor who will approve the results or the outcome of the task performed by the system. So that you can give the systems as much freedom as possible and allow it to complete the task for the users. But the outcome should be made available before it goes live so that the user can approve it or edit it or even supervise the action also. So that is one caveat that you need to remember. So when the system does it, the whole task becomes smooth and it works in the background. So user does not have to take the effort of completing it, but he needs to know what is the outcome of it. So you need to assign the user the role of a supervisor, but allow the system to take control of the whole thing and perform the task. Also, when you are assigning the task to the system, you also need to identify and consider users' context, business objectives, the special needs that occur because of the technological differences, all that things. So automating tasks is not very easy, but once you successfully do that, it can save a lot of effort from the users and it can improve a lot of user experience as well. Now, bad design creates a feeling of inability. This is widely seen across the web, and this is a simple message that is being communicated by the system to the user. Now see, the operation couldn't be completed. WD general network error 500. Now what does that mean? It simply means the network connection is lost. It's as simple as that. Now why should why should an alert be so complex? I mean, it can avoid the jargons. It need not use technical language. Instead, it can use a simple layman's terms. So it can simply say that the network connection is lost. So when the communication from the system to the user is very simple and anything that can be easily understood by the users, then the user will easily comprehend it and will take the right action. If the communication from the system or the alert that the system sends out to the users is so complex and filled with jargon, then what happens? It only confuses the users and the user might even commit mistakes when performing a task. So it will definitely, a jargon will only increase to the frustration of the users. Now, there are several ways to address this. Address the feeling of inability that a system can create for the users. So one of them would be to simplify the way system communicates to the users. Use simple layman's terms, use simple ways of communication to the users, simple English. Avoid crowding of the UI, remove all the non-contextual and non-task relevant information from the screen. Anything that is not pertaining to the given point of time where the user is performing a task, remove it so that you don't crowd the UI. Now, another way of doing it, another way of addressing the feeling of inability that the system might generate for the user is by easing out the tasks that the user performs. Now, how can you do that? You need to run usability testing. You need to identify the task being performed by the users, the correct personas, and you need to see how they are performing it. Are they doing it exactly the way you have designed it? Or are they finding it in any different ways of doing it? Or are they getting it wrong altogether? So by different phases of usability testing and multiple rounds of usability testing, you can streamline and simplify the tasks. So that is one way of making the user feel in control. Now, yet another way would be to approach the UI in a different way. That is called one task per page UI. I mean, you will be focusing on one single task per page. So that the advantage of focusing on one task or one screen element or one call to action on a screen is when you do that, you can direct users' attention to the most relevant information, labels, and tasks. So you can make the user behave in certain ways. You can actually make the user, your mental model, the user's mental model and your conceptual model will actually match that. Because you are facilitating user to behave in a certain way. If you remember, in the first slide, we said that a good design facilitates desired action of the users. So when you plan an interface, you have to decide what should be the desirable action of the users. I mean, when you place a call to action button on the home page, you are expecting the users to click it. Now, if you place hundreds of animation on the same page and you expect the user to click on the call to action button, no, I don't think so. I don't think they will click it. So instead of that, if you are placing a call to action button on the home page, you need to make sure that the user's attention goes there and fixes on that call to action button, so that you can eliminate all the distractions on the home page and you can be pretty sure that the user will click it. And when the user clicks it, then it is a proof that your conceptual model and their mental model actually merges and matches. So one task per page UI approach is very effective in that. It is originated with the UX team that was working with the UK's, I think, the migration or some government site that they were doing. So it is a very interesting approach. Maybe you can check it on the web. You will get a more idea about that. And yes, I understand many of you might be thinking that this may not be applicable in all cases. Yes, I agree. For example, on an e-commerce site, yes, this cannot be done. But even on e-commerce site, as you add the product on a shopping cart and then you check out, maybe you have seen that the top navigation disappears, especially in Amazon and Flipkart and all that, where they actually research the user's behavior when they actually check out. So that is one way of making sure that the user don't get distracted from the task that they're performing. Also, in e-commerce site, what happens is that once they are in the stage of checking out, they don't show options. I mean, let's say if you have added a shirt worth or a salwar worth of 1,500 and it's red color, okay, so usually on any other page you will have n number of possible options that you can add to the cart. But once you are inside the checkout stage, you suddenly all the options get disappeared. Why? Because when you are shown options at that stage, people will have a tendency to go after it and they will never buy. They will keep adding it to the cart. Then they will reach the checkout stage. They will find again options. They will add to that. They will go after it and nobody will buy. So to prevent that, once the user reaches the stage where they actually buy or when they actually check out, there is no option, so that they can focus on, so that the design can make the user focus on the most desirable action, which is buying, and which is what the business wants you to do also. That's why they make money. That's how they make money. So one task per page approach, even if it is not applicable on a search catalog page on an e-commerce site, there are several other pages where you can still apply. Bad design ignores platform differences. Many of you might have found many other sites where it might render beautifully on a website, on a desktop, but it works pretty bad on a mobile screen. So let's see a similar example here. This is India's Department of Science and Technology. Now see how badly it renders on a mobile screen. It is fairly good on a website, but it's pretty bad on a mobile site. Now, how can you address this? Now, this brings us to the realm of adaptive and responsive design. Now, I'm sure many of you might have come across this and might have felt a tricky area to deal with. Especially, I have found this to be a very tricky area to deal with. Based on my experience, adaptive design is all about allocating the tasks, features, functionalities based on users' context, behavior, and business needs. For example, you may have, let's say, 10 features, and you decide that only 2 features will be implemented on mobile, while the 10 will be implemented on a desktop. So that is adaptive, based on the user's behavior and the business needs and the user's context of use. Okay, I'll come to it a little detail when we talk about it as an example. from a responsive design approach, what happens is that the entire set of features will be rendered both on desktop and the mobile screen. So you need to decide which approach you want to take. Let me give you an example here. Maybe you will get a better idea as to how to approach this thing. For example, if you are working on a project management software, and everyone knows that for a project management software, one of the primary tasks of a project management software is to create a project. Now, when you create a project, you have to enter a lot of data. And we all know that how difficult it is to enter data on a mobile screen. Now, from a adaptive design point of view, you can decide that the creation of a project, which involves a lot of data entry, can be restricted only to the websites, web interface. While the project status, the editing, the approval, the status checking, all sorts of other tasks that is related to project can be done on mobile screens and the desktop also. Maybe there are ways in which you can actually make the features exclusive for a platform. I mean, you can only make them do, the user needs to do it only on one platform. It can't be done on any other. So it is a call that you need to take based on user's context, business needs also. If the business decides that the user needs to behave in certain way on the mobile screen, because I was working with Manorama Online, which is the online division of Malayalam Manorama. So what we used to do was, there was certain content that is available on the website. We used to cross promote it with additional content on the mobile screen. So when the user actually visits a website, they will see that to see a picture gallery, you need to download the app. So that gallery will not be available on the desktop. So this is a way to cross promote and to build audience for both the products. So when the user visits, because everybody will visit on the desktop based website. Now, if you are in the process of building up a mobile app, you need to restrict certain features on the mobile screen, so that to access that, you will force them to download the app and install it and view it or act on it. So that way, adaptive can be used to increase the consumption of certain products also. So it has a lot of business implications as well, and marketing implications as well. Now, how can you achieve this responsive and adaptive? It is in the realm of the technology and front-end development. So I'm not delving too much into that. Maybe many of you, I think, from a technology background, will be able to communicate it better. So as far as I can make out, you can use several frameworks here, maybe libraries such as Bootstrap, HTML5. A lot of stuff can be done, boilerplates, templates. So to achieve this task of adaptive and responsive design, which makes things very easy. Now we came through 10 points now. Based on this, there are few major takeaways that I think you should have, and you should start using that when you step out of this webinar. So when you come across a bad design, you need to ask yourself, what makes the design so bad? You need to identify the specificities of each bad design. And you need to identify, the next thing that you need to identify is who are the target audience of the product. Now, once you know about that, you can easily identify whether the product features actually matches their requirement or mental model. So once you know answers to all these three questions, you can learn a ton from bad design. And once you learn a ton from bad designs, you will be able to do the correct actions to improve your existing products and to give good user experience. So that brings me to the end of session 1. Now, who wants a surprise? So if you want a surprise, I would like to see some noise being made. Yes, in the comment box or something like that. Otherwise, I'm not going to tell you. So I want some of you to type something in the chat box or comment box or whatever, so that I can see. Then I'll share. Otherwise, I'll assume that you are not interested in the surprise and I'm not going to share. So if you are interested, please post something on your comment box, and so that I can see it, I can share it. So where can I access the comments here? Chat. This is on? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So, okay, I see. Oh my God, so many yeses. Very good. Okay. So, okay, let's go to that. So this is this gift that I have. What you need to do is you need to visit. I'll drop my LinkedIn here. What you need to do is you need to visit my linkedin.com, LinkedIn profile, and you need to connect with me and then post me a message called IDF Kerala. When you do that, I'll share this digital book. It is based on my experience. I have created this 50 field principles of UX. You can use it as you work on a daily basis. You can keep it printed on your desk. You can refer it. And I think I have found this extremely useful. I even refer it. So maybe you will also find it extremely useful. So those who wants the book may connect me and ask for it. That's it. Just post IDF Kerala and come or message me IDF Kerala, and I'll share the link to download it. Okay, so I think we are at the end of the session, and now I think we can, if you have found any bad designs, we can deconstruct that. And if you have any questions, you can ask. Show me some tough love. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shiv Prasad. That was a wonderful session. From bad design to badass product. So as he said, now it is time for question and answer. So we are unmuting viewers' mic. So
Okay.
please come forward with the questions, or if you have any point which you would like to discuss with him and other people, please come forward. And if you're facing any difficulties to unmute your mic, please comment on the session. We will work on it. So yeah, meanwhile, we have one comment from Ajay. Most of the government sites have bad design. So that's a statement. He didn't complete the question. So
can you give an example? And so that I just want to hear your thoughts on that, everybody's thoughts on that, and maybe in the available time, maybe we can throw some ideas as to how to improve it and all that. So let's make some interactive session. Otherwise, it will not be entertaining, right?
Ajay, are you able to unmute your mic?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Jay, come along, man.
Hi. I have seen a lot of website. Like I was about to visit Banaras few months back. Okay. So I dropped the plan anyhow. But I visited their website.
Okay.
It was so pathetic and it was so congested. Then I visited most of the website or any government website. All are cluttered. Not only ICICI Bank, but most of the government banks. Government websites are cluttered with a lot of information where you will get confused what you want exactly.
Okay. So maybe because of their monopoly, in the market that's making them ignore the user experience. Maybe they know that people will come to them for any reason and for all reasons. So imagine that many of the university websites, they are very bad. So they know that even if you keep it very bad, students will come to that site for different reasons. So why take effort to improve it? I mean, anyway, they are doing it, they are using it. I mean, then why should we improve it? So that's one side of it. So maybe that's the reason why it is not being considered as a priority for them.
So Prasad, one interesting comment in the comment box by Jofin. He says, not just the government website, in fact, the Design Institute itself have bad designs.
Which one did you find, Jofin? Which one did you find most ugly looking when it comes to design sites? Design Institute. Oh, NID. Wow.
My God.
Let's open that. Can someone? I'll stop sharing my screen. Can someone open it? Oh my God. This and they learn all about heuristic evaluation expert review, right?
Yeah.
No wonder. That's why people say that you don't need an NID to become a designer. But this is centuries old, right? I mean, the way it moves, the carousel, it is even improved now.
Hi everyone, can I share an experience with this?
Yeah, please go ahead. Who is this?
Yeah, so my name is Imtiaz. I am actually a very beginner in the field of design. So just this year I applied to NID for my master's in product design.
No,
and I had the first phase. It was easy. After the first phase, because of COVID, we had to do everything online, the portfolio presentations and everything.
Okay.
And they announced the deadlines like 3 days before the deadline date. We had to submit the portfolio statement of purpose and all. And it was very difficult for people to upload this thing, because usually when you upload something in a website, you will see the status, right? You'll see the percentage as to how much percentage is being uploaded, or if the file is successful and so on. But this time, none of that was available. Like once we uploaded, everything became blank, and there was just a timestamp written. We didn't know if our portfolio and SOP was updated, or we didn't know if that session had ended. We had to redo it, and then there was not much time involved as well. So when we reached out to the other candidates, they also told the same thing, that we didn't know if our portfolio was updated. We didn't know if they had received it and so on. And it got me wondering, even if the best design institute in India is having such a user experience, so what will be the, it's a paradox, as in, like, even if they're having that idea with respect to design, how will it translate to the other aspects of the country as well? I was just thinking about that.
Correct. You're right there. It's really alarming, actually. It's really alarming. And maybe when you are there, you need to do it in your small way. Maybe as a student, I'm not sure how much you will be able to influence the stakeholders behind NID, but you need to start speaking towards that. I mean, you need to do whatever is possible. You need to start doing it so that you can, at least it represents the nation, right? I mean, it's a national institution, right? So
yes, definitely.
So you need to, the look and feel should be improved, definitely. That's for sure. I agree on that. How do we convince stakeholders? I mean, is there any other question that I missed, or most of the comments I have banned?
Yeah, so we do have one more question from Joel.
Okay.
That is like, basically, so how do we convince our clients to make the website is not crowded? One of client point is like, there are a lot of white space, so we need to put maximum content. So that is question from Joel.
You can use, you can run usability testing and ask the users what are they actually observing on the screen. Maybe you should not ask them. Maybe you should try to identify based on their behavior as to what they actually lay their eyes on in the first instance. That is with regarding the user experience, usability testing. The other one would be you can use heat maps, and there are softwares like Hotjar, which will help you to actually prove where the user's eyes are getting locked on. So, and where the users are mostly focusing on. So if the website has data that shows that where the business wants to focus, the users are not focusing, then that becomes the point of discussion and to prove your point.
Thank you.
Am I making sense, Joel?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Shiv Prasad. Actually, I just
That's what
also
I mean. Usability testing is always a way out. I mean, if you want, you need to first define as to what you are aiming to achieve through a usability testing. If your objective of a usability testing is to identify where the users are actually interacting with, or where the users will actually look or see or find or understand, then you need to frame your questions in that way. That's it. And you will get insights from it. And maybe you can ask, maybe if the call to action button says that add or buy this book. Let's imagine that the button says buy this book, and you have tons of other books on the same page, and you ask them to you'll ask them to do certain tasks, and which will be you will clearly understand as to where the users are looking and where the user's attention is going and what the user will actually do. So if you do it with all the personas, then things will be clear. And never go with an assumption. You have to validate it. That's what.
Thank you, Shiv Prasad. We have one more question from Hiren.
Yes.
How do you convince a client on what good design can do, as they always ask for return of investment?
You can actually show what the existing product is doing, okay, and maybe you can show them maybe a subset of the task you can take and you can test it in an ideal environment. For example, if the home page is not converting that much, then you need to anyway the client will approach you with a problem. Now imagine if the product is not converting that much, and let's say 100 people are coming and only 2 people are getting converted, then you need to identify the problem, why people are not converting. That itself will give you a lot of insights as to why things are happening in certain way. Now what you need to do is you need to come up with solutions, and you need to iterate on that, and you need to create a few prototypes also, and you need to test it. So once you test it, you will come to know how the users are behaving. And again, you will have data based on it. And you can extrapolate it into the real one, making it convincing enough to the users or the clients to understand that if we use the new design, the conversion rate will increase. Am I making sense, or should I explain? Hello?
Yeah,
Kiran?
so, hello?
Kiran, you want me to explain again?
No, there is a message from Hiren, like, got it, thanks a
Okay,
lot.
all right, great.
And someone was trying to ask something. I couldn't see the name.
You can also search for similar industry case studies on the web and show their results and how UX impacted their growth. Very good. Yeah, that's an excellent idea. That's an excellent idea. But usually when the clients, based on my experience, when you can actually show how their own products, I mean, when the client will, let's say the client comes and shows your website and their website and asks for increase in conversion, then if you can prove with the same website, they will be more convinced than a case study on the web, because it's kind of remote that they will get convinced by a case study. But it's still, again, it gives a lot of value to your pitch. I agree. Josephine, great point.
Hi, Shiv Prasad. Hello.
Yes, please.
Hi, this is Anirudh. I work at Experian Technologies.
Okay.
I'm an experienced designer. So this is just to add a point that I, see very often. We come across this CAPTCHA, right? Verification code,
Yes.
which as we proceed forward, we are seeing the fonts are getting much crazier. And I would always doubt how would an elderly people, especially let's say an age group of 60 above, who might be suffering from a vision problem, will find it very difficult to have that capture entered below, especially while making a transaction. This would actually arise a lot of anxiety from the user side. And recently I saw how Realme, the website, right, for mobile phones and accessories, they actually had an interesting approach for that. They have a slider where a picture is shown and a small piece or part of the puzzle is taken outside, and all we need to do is to slide it toward that. And that
Yes.
actually has a better, experience for the users, rather than, putting a lot of confusion and anxiety towards them. I think it is an approach which we probably should be looking forward to. I mean, also the finding out the traffic lights, the classical one from Google.
Yes. Yes. I think Google has done a lot of research on that. I mean, maybe that's why they are sticking on that that traffic light, that staircase, all that thing, because
Yes.
maybe if you ask a question like 2 multiplied by 2 or 2 plus 2, the fonts are so small that the elderly cannot see it. If a kid comes in, he doesn't know how to multiply or how to, that's again a problem. So they have done a multiple rounds of research on the CAPTCHA alone, because they can afford it and they have different teams to work on different projects. So they might have done a lot of projects and they might have realized that this is the ideal one. I mean, this can be done with very little knowledge, right? I mean, anybody with the eyesight can do it.
Exactly.
So even there used to be a time when we used to hear the CAPTCHA, right?
Exactly.
There used to be a small icon that will actually play the CAPTCHA for us. Now it's gone already, because that has actually created problems, I guess.
Exactly.
So that will evolve. That will again evolve. And now there used to be the CAPTCHA became reCAPTCHA, and all the reCAPTCHA became so complex. There was a time, and now it's simplified into staircases, traffic lights, and zebra crossing and all that. So it's kind of cool. I mean, you can make it as simple as possible, and it's fun.
Exactly. Yes.
Because the current artificial intelligence can easily bypass it, making it easy for bots to spam. Yes, that's another good point. So multiple verification will have to be done. Yes, it's all trade-off. It's all a trade-off. So you need to. The only good thing is who targets a website with bots, right? A website that has a lot of financial implications. That's the only site that will be really targeted by bots, because there is some money or some other objective to be made out of it. So when it comes to simple actions, you can still go ahead with simple captures. Maybe when it comes to transactions, you need to go ahead with multiple levels of security transactions, security validations and all that. So yes, you have to make that choice. You have to make that trade-off between what you need to implement, how much it will create problem for the users, and how easy it is for the users. And always remember who are your target audience. Create proper personas, do proper research, understand the type of users who come to the site, and segregate them based on their abilities, their technology know-how, their background, their objectives. And once you have that, you have solutions for almost everything. So you have n number of technologies to choose from, and once you understand about the users, that's the easiest thing to do. Maybe you have to go back to the drawing board and do all over again. That's it.
Do we have more questions or?
Okay.
Yeah, so there is a message from Anirudh. I was pointing out how crazy phones capture would be hectic for a segment of users. Also, Google and Realme has revolved all the time. Uh, thank you, thank you, Jofin, and thank you, Anirudh, for the valuable points. Uh,
Yes.
so, let me know if anyone having issue or anyone facing issue to unmute their mic.
So, Prasad, I think there is a new question from Ajay.
Okay.
I want to know about the accessibility.
Yes.
How do you keep accessibility in mind while designing, and how do you design for colorblind people?
There are tools available that will help you understand how the colorblind people will see it. There are tools out there which you can easily. I don't. It's a pretty vast area, so I'll give you a brief idea about. There are tools available which I think we can take it offline. I think there are lots to explain. So those who are interested in accessibility can definitely reach out to me, because when I was in EY, I used to do a lot of accessibility projects also. So definitely you can reach out to me, and if you have any questions regarding that, then I'll be able to help you out. That is regarding, I want to know about accessibility, I can help you out. How do you keep accessibility in mind while designing? First of all, I will always go back to the type of users. I mean, how many percentage of your population is actually differently able? If you find that there is a significant amount of people who are disabled using your product, or if the law mandates you to make it accessible, then you have to keep it in mind. And the easiest thing, there are 3 levels to it. Level 1, level 2, and level 3. AA, single A, AA, and AAA. So what you can do is you have to make sure that there is always, I mean, I'm just generalizing the solution. Okay. So what you need to do is, if you are using text, you have to use multimedia. If you are using multimedia, you have to use text. If you are using one stimuli, you have to supplement it with other stimuli. This is the simplest way to approach accessibility, because a blind person will come and view a video. How will he make out, or how will she make out? So you need to have text that can be read by a software for her. So what is essentially being discussed in a video? If the image is loading, and it can be only seen by a person who with eyesight. Now, how will a blind person see it? Now you need to have an alt information associated with the image. Now that this software will actually read it out. So here there is a flower. Flower's image is being shown, it will say. So always think about supplementing the multimedia with other types of multimedia. Basic multimedia. Basic text is very effective when it comes to making products accessible. So text can be read by almost all the softwares across the web. So you need to effectively use text to supplement multimedia. So always think about creating multiple stimuli. Yes, multiple stimuli can confuse the users, normal users, but you have to make a trade-off between them. If you want to know more about accessibility, you can always reach out to me. We can discuss.
Just add to what Shiv Prasad mentioned. It's the accessibility area is very, very vast area, and it's a bit tricky to find solution for all the designs.
Yes.
The only simple answer to Ajay would be like just stick to the guidelines we have provided by different agencies. Yes. So they have came up with the guidelines after so many years of research and different type of trial and error methods. So yes. The guidelines are the principles we need to follow. So if we can follow that, accessibility, yeah.
Yes, W3C. There are so many guidelines out there. Yes. How many people are there in our call today?
So I think we reached about 47. At the moment, we have 33.
Oh, great. Very good. Any other questions?
Shiva, it's me, Aju here.
Yeah, please.
I'm audible?
Yes, please ask.
I just have, okay, so what we discussed right now, like all the process to test the product and all this, like do a usability testing or a user test to understand whether the feature is needed or not. But in most cases, when we work with service side project, what actually happening, so the once the requirement come, they like within a small time gap, they start the development. Even the user stories are not completely ready, or the task flows are not completely ready. So they will push for a development in order to target the delivery time actually. So in these situations, we always go with the assumptions actually. So we don't have the time to test with the real users or with any dummy users and come back and reiterate the designs. It's not, most cases it's not be possible actually. It not happen in most times because.
So you're working on agile environment, right?
Yeah.
So you will be working on certain features and you will be rolling it out.
Correct.
Not the entire product. You will be moduling it out and you will be then.
So maybe it's a phase wise actually.
Okay. So so what exactly is your problem in?
So in that case, how we set up the whole UX process, like because we can't do.
I think Shiv Prasad, what Aju was mentioning is like, so in product company, probably we have the luxury to follow all the UX processes or the phases of the design cycle. But in a service company, it's a bit tricky. Like some projects, we may not get chance to interact with the end users and do the testing, all those stuff.
Okay.
So in that scenario, probably what we can do, like how we can make sure the product is user friendly. That is what Aju was mentioning, right?
I think that's what I can make out also. Yes. So what you can do is do you have any analytics with you about the task that you are performing?
So you're talking about the user data, right?
Yes, some sort of software that is generating how
no.
is currently behaving.
No, because it might be a new project, so there is no data actually.
So how are you actually identifying, or how are you deciding which task? How should the user complete the task? I mean, what are the screen flows? Through which all screens should they go and all that?
So right now we looking it like in a way, like look at the computer products, how the task flow is happening, and we try to do it a little bit in that. The second method is we basically do a kind of a assumptions only. Okay, this might
assumptions.
be
Okay,
correct. Yeah,
assumptions are good. You need to. That is what I have been speaking about. Assumptions are your conceptual model actually. Your design model is what your assumptions are. So what you need to do is you need to start with assumptions. You need to draw inspiration from the competitors, and you need to, once you always make sure that when you design something, you need to make sure that user is able to achieve the task as easy as possible.
Okay.
Just because the developers or the management says that the user needs to, the screens should go through, the screen flow should be like this. It shouldn't be the case. I mean, if you are the user, how will you go through it? I mean, how simple can you make it? You need to have a clear idea. And then what you need to do is once you set up that flow through which the user is supposed to go to perform a task, you need to validate it with your own friends, your own colleagues. Okay, so no user is not a situation at all. you can test with one person or the other. It can be the person sitting next to you, or it can be from somebody from another team. You just have to show them the thing. You can take your laptop to them and ask them that if I ask you to add this product to the cart, then how will you do it? It can be as simple as that. And there are legends out there in the user experience domain who say that if you don't have an access to testing, test with your mother. That's what they say. I mean, even testing the product with your mother is better than having tested with no one. That's what they're saying. So you always need to find somebody. I mean, you are not the only person working in the organization, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So you can find people in your team, and I used to do it. I mean, I used to work in Infopark. Okay, I used to work in Infopark, and what we used to do was I used to walk down to the lobby and show the system to people and ask them to perform it. There are cafe coffee day outlets. So where I sit and I'll ask people, I mean, this is how it is done. I mean, if you don't have access to it, 15 minutes is all you need. I mean, you will always find people there, right? And over the coffee, you can carry the laptop and you can share it to them and ask them how will they perform. So in the beginning, they might laugh a little, but you are learning a lot of stuff. It is fun actually to do it with actual users. So there is always a chance to test it with users. So it may not be correct representatives, but they are still users, and they will give you a clear idea. At least 50% of the problem will come out through that itself.
Okay.
Okay, so you can do it. You can still do it, and you can validate it. And if any data available from the competitors or from your own analytics softwares, then you can validate it. And then once you roll out also, you need to make sure how does your development phase happen? I mean, once you roll out and it hits the market and the patch goes and sits in the real product, or how does that happen?
Actually,
No, my question is, I mean, when you roll out a feature, it gets updated in the existing users' systems, or how does that happen?
No, it's based on the project, right? It's a one-time project. Like client comes and develop it and they go. So after that, there is no analytics. Even there is no analytics also. Sometimes you don't build it in the product.
Then how come they are saying that it's not good enough? I mean, if they have not tested it, and if they have not even observed people using it, then how can they say that your solution is not good enough?
I think, Shiva, it's like both the parties, like the person who is designing and the customer, both are in assumption. So there is
that's right. That's right.
You cannot validate it.
The designer and the client are not the people who are supposed to use it.
Right.
It is an entirely different group of people, right? So you can validate your assumptions only based on the preference, based on the behavior of the actual users. So either you need to roll it out to the real projects and test it, or you need to test the prototype with the users. That's what you need to do. Otherwise, you don't have to take their opinion as a final one. Maybe you can ask, you can run. Also, you can run it again with your friends and peers, and then find out the problems with it, if there is. But I would not say that if the client tells you that this is not good, you don't have to accept it. Yes, I have worked in startups. I have worked with pathetic clients who will come and say that I need to test this one fine morning. Then the next day they will say that we need to roll out. So I have worked with all sorts of clients, so I know. So there will be a stage will come when you will stop listening to that. So your manager will be afraid, definitely, but you don't have to. You can stand on your point of view. I mean, you can say that I have tested it with whatever available users that I have. Even I have tested it with peers, and I have tested it with people around me, and they have done it so smoothly. So, and you can even show them the flow that they went through.
Okay.
That's all you need to do. I mean, you don't have access to the resources, then how can you simplify or how can you validate your assumptions? There's absolutely no way, right? And even within that, you are trying to do it. And that is more than enough. Huh?
And Shiva, I think we have a question from the lady in the room.
Yes,
Ammu.
please.
Thanks, Ammu, for the question. So Ammu mentioned she's basically a front-end developer. So I heard about top companies like Google, Apple, IBM, etc. were making revolutionary design. So I just want to know that only they are making the good designs every time, or they have any bad designs?
It's
We
more
have
like
so many bad designs. There
yeah.
are so many bad designs, obviously.
I think her question was like companies like Google, Apple, they are making, I mean, every time they are making good designs, or is there any time they made some bad designs also?
If you go to any of the top tier companies and if you see their HR site, okay, you will find it to be very cumbersome and the process is entirely lengthy, and it's such a pathetic thing. And many of these sites would be actually relying on a third-party platform, which will be even more difficult. And when it comes to Google, you will find a lot of products that they found out to be with very bad design and they withdrew from the market. For example, they used to have a home page that can be fully customized a few years ago. That's what is coming to my mind right now. And they thought that, okay, they can pull data from each customer of Google, or each users of Google can customize their home page by logging in. And the entire home page can be redone with widgets. I mean, you can bring in data from cricket scores, you can bring data from stock market, you can bring in data from news, and you can change the color and you can change the look and feel and everything. And what happened? They found that most of the people are using it and they began to feel Google to be a very bad, Google used to create for them a very bad experience. Just because the original Google was very good, but people used to customize it so much that everything went out of control. So they decided that just to make sure that original concept is held across the world in its original form, they decided to remove that feature of customizing the homepage. Now you can't do anything. So there are actually the option that they give to customize the homepage of the Google really backfired on them. That was a bad design decision that they made. So there are tons of examples out there. If you just Google it, you will find out. And there are many small companies who are coming up with excellent designs also. It all depends on how much you understand your target audience and solve their problems. Simple as that.
There was something called Google Plus.
Yes.
Yes, it miserably failed because there were very good competitors. And also
I don't know. It came to my mind, but I don't have any solid proof as to why Google Plus failed. Is it just because of the design issue, or is it because of any other reason? Maybe Facebook was
mostly about the connectivity issue. I mean, design, I think it went well, but the number of people who were getting to connect was not that profitable. I mean, it did not work efficiently. That was one.
That's what I mean. It did not work. That's the bottom line.
Exactly.
Even this recently rolled out Facebook dark version, right? Recently, Facebook did a whole redesign, right?
Yeah.
Yes, they
so many people are. I am against it. I didn't find it very good. I find it extremely difficult to use it right now because many of the features that I used to do went inside, and now I find it very extremely difficult to actually use it. And many people have actually decided to frequent it less. I mean, people are going less to Facebook these days. But it's so addictive that they have played with your heart and mind so much that now you crave for that dopamine kick. So every time you will check the app, for sure. So they haven't found a great difficulty just because of the design change. But when it comes to a simple, but even my point is, even Facebook can go wrong, and people are debating on it right even now. So just like that, I think all the people, all the big giants of IT, they all make mistakes, but they can afford it. They can afford it and withdraw the product altogether, or entirely do a redesign.
Thank you. And so we almost reach the end of the session. Before winding up, we missed one question from Arjun. So he would like to hear about a few words on colors.
Can you come again? Your voice is...
Kaushik, are you asking some question?
Can you type it and send, please?
Okay. So meanwhile, let's go back to Arjun's question. So he would like to hear your viewpoints on colors, something like how to use it properly, etc.
Colors. Okay. So use white space, negative space effectively to direct users' attention, and use colors to highlight and to accentuate or to show information hierarchy. And you have to use minimum number of colors, not too many. And when you use colors, always rely on first define the brand colors and then try to create products. Once you create the products, then you go back to the brand color will not be good enough. First you decide the brand colors, then you come down to the product design. So that would be a good thing. And I will not specify because different situations will call for different combinations of colors, and people will come up with so many wide variety of color combinations. So it's absolutely meaningless to say that I like this and this industry or this domain, this color suits more. But there are certain colors that will evoke certain emotions in you. That's also another part that you need to understand. For example, if you use red color, it will create certain impacts on you, impacts on the users. So when you use red color, it shows a sense of urgency. It shows your heartbeat increases. These are all proven things, and your blood pressure increases. So when you use colors, you have to make sure that it does not affect the user's mental state, because only when the user is in control of things, he will make very less errors when they perform tasks. So that's why you will never see red color being widely used on a payment gateway, because if you make a mistake, that can be costly for the end user. So the businesses don't want their users to make mistakes. So that's why they will never use red color. If they use, they are making a big mistake. And there are certain colors which will make you very calm. For example, blue, ocean blue, all these colors. So if you dig down deeper, every color has certain emotional impact on the users. So you have to balance it like that. And certain colors will have certain connotations. For example, it will reflect a meaning on you. For example, if you use gold color, it shows like luxury. So, so when you go to a very high-priced product, you might find certain websites using gold color. And the bottom line is, you have to understand how the color impacts you, impacts the end user. You have to use white space or negative space effectively. You have to minimize the number of colors. That's minimize the number of colors and maintain a consistency. So these are the 3 points that I would recommend you to follow to use colors properly.
So I would like to thank each and everyone who participated in this webinar. And special thanks to those participants who were actively asking questions and contributing their points and were participating on discussion. So if you would like to discuss a specific topic, or if you have any suggestion, please write to us. We will take it on our next webinar. So we are available on social media like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and at IDF Kerala. You can also write us idfkerala@hotmail.com. We have an exclusive IDF Kerala community in Interaction Design Foundation website. So hope we will meet all of you next week at the same time with another webinar. Stay safe and stay connected. Thank you.
Thank you.
Prasad, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, thank you, Jameson. Yes, just a great day. Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.